So you started a nonprofit. What are you supposed to do next? I'm going to talk about that in this video. Let's get into it. Hey y'all, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. So if that sounds like something you need help with, make sure you subscribe to this channel because I drop videos all the time, all right? And also make sure you join my membership. You can become a boss in purpose. You get special perks and discounts being a part of my membership. You can just go to my channel homepage to join. So you started your nonprofit. You got so excited. You got your paperwork done. Maybe you have 501c3 status and you're asking yourself, what are we supposed to do right now? What should we be focusing on? So this is the video where I'm going to break this down and I'm going to simplify it because I have talked about this in other videos. In fact, I have a video that's called How to Start a Nonprofit Organization. And a lot of what I'm talking about today is included in that video, but it's also 40 minutes. And so I wanted to create a simplified version so you can more easily think about it within this framework that I'm about to give you. All right. I want you to wait to the end because I'm sharing 4 documents that I'm going to be talking about all throughout this video, but I'm going to sum up the 4 documents that every new nonprofit should have. So you don't want to miss the end of this video. So I want you to think about your nonprofit in terms of your administrative areas, your programming areas, and your fundraising and communications. I'm going to do that again. It's a very simple framework. 3 areas: administrative, programming, and your fundraising and communications. Now, I lump fundraising and communications in together because you can't have one without the other. You can't raise money unless you're communicating with people, unless you're visible, and you shouldn't be fundraising if you're not communicating with the people that you're asking for money from or who have given you money. So I'll put those together and I'll explain that a little bit more when I break down that category. So let's talk about admin. In all of these categories, I'm going to stress to you that it's important that you operate from a set of goals. There are a bunch of reasons why you need to do that, but most importantly, everybody who's working with your organization needs to know what's the point, what are we working towards? Your vision is your big goal. I have talked about that before in this channel. I actually did a video that I'm linking above on how to create a vision statement. But your vision statement is your ultimate goal. It's the biggest goal you have. But everything you do should be lining up with that big goal. So when you're thinking about, like, let's say you just started and you're thinking about over the next year, you need to be thinking about what are the goals you want to accomplish over this next year. And then as you get more stable, you want to think long term. You want to think 3 years from now. You want to think 5 years from now. But I like to keep it simple. So let's just say a year from now. Let's just do 1 year goals. So when you're trying to figure out, okay, what are your goals? What should you be focused on? That's why I brought up these 3 areas, this framework that I talked about: your admin, your programming, and your fundraising communications. All of the goals that you create across all 3 of those areas should flow into your strategic plan. And let's just call it your 1 year plan. Everything should be operating off that plan. So you have a set number of goals. You have action steps to get to those goals, and you also have identified who's going to help you accomplish those goals or who's responsible for what to get to those goals, and what are the deadlines that you have around those goals. So when you meet periodically through the year, you can look at your plan and see how you're doing and making sure you're on track. All right. So when you're trying to figure out the goals to fill in this strategic plan, you're thinking about these 3 categories. Let's talk about admin first. And admin, sometimes people call it overhead. You can think about it as your infrastructure. It's everything you need to keep the organization running. It's the fuel for the organization. In admin, one of the biggest things you want to think about, especially in the beginning, is getting your board together. You need a strong board as a nonprofit. And many people will argue me down, and many people will say, you don't need a board, you just need a couple of people for the paperwork. You don't want people to steal your vision. You don't want this, you don't want that. There's a lot of fear around putting a board together, and some of it's justified and some of it's not. But the reality is that the IRS wants to see a board in place to protect your tax-exempt status. They want people in place who understand their legal, their ethical responsibilities around running this organization. They want people in place to manage any conflicts of interest so people don't misuse their tax-exempt status or misuse public funds. So it's important to have a board. It's important to have a board for strategic reasons, but also for reasons that have to do with the IRS and you staying out of hot water. So it's to your advantage to think about your board. So what are your goals to get your board solidified, right? Are you trying to meet your recruitment numbers because you have a minimum number of board members you need to get? Do you want to have a board meeting schedule in place so everyone knows when you're meeting and they're together? Do you want the board to operate a certain way? Do you want the board to learn certain things? Are there development goals around that? Are there policies that you want to have in place? Side note, if you need to know what policies that are important in the first year, I cover a lot of this in my board's masterclass. I'm going to link it below so you can look at it and see if you'd like to purchase it. But it covers a lot of what you need to do to get your board together. So that's one of the things you should be thinking about in terms of goals for your admin is how to get your board set, right? That's one area. Another area may be around insurance and protections for your organization. Another area may be around paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork and administrative stuff you got to get straight when you are running a nonprofit. So maybe there are certain goals around that. Okay. So I gave you a couple of examples of what to think about when you're thinking about your administrative goals. Let's go to programming. And one of the first things you need to get straight on when you have a nonprofit is that you need to think in terms of programs. You provide services, but you also want to think about like each one of those set of services is housed as a program. You want to do this because it helps when it comes to budgeting out your programs. It helps when it comes to organizing yourself and having a structure within your organization, okay? Even if you don't feel like it's a full out program, don't gotta get deep with it. You provide, maybe you provide coats or socks for a population and you do that on a regular basis. That's a program. Because in order to do that, it costs money, it costs staffing, it costs other things, materials, that kind of thing. And you got to think about it as a program so you can budget that program adequately. Because each program has its own budget that funnels into the organizational budget. So that's all the reasons why you want to think about what you do in terms of programming, like in the structure of programs. But what are your goals around those programs? That's the next step. Like, what do you want to accomplish in terms of each one of those set of services? So maybe you want to serve a certain number of people, or maybe you want to launch by a certain time of the year. Maybe that's your goal for your program. When you do that, then you start thinking about all the things it takes to get to that goal. So maybe you got to recruit people, you got to design materials, you got to get materials together and write out your curriculum. You got to do all these things. You got to get staffing, maybe volunteers. You got to think about how you're going to collect data and how you're going to collect outcomes. So once you establish your goals, it begins to tell you and signal to you what's next. All right. So if you know that you want to launch in September of a certain year, then what are all the things you need to do a month before, 3 months before, 6 months before to make that happen? That's why I love talking in terms of goals, because the goals tell you where you're going. Where we get hemmed up is that we forget our goals or we don't check in with our goals and we be all over the place. But that's why I said to keep this simple, think in the structure of goals. And right now, again, we're talking about programming. So we cover admin, we cover program. Let's talk about fundraising and communication. When it comes to fundraising, you want to think about what are your fundraising goals. They should align with everything you put in your budget. Everything your budget says about what you need to function as an organization should translate into your fundraising goals. It takes $75,000 to make the organization run. You need to make at least $75,000 when it comes to your fundraising. But you want to think about, even within those goals, what's your fundraising plan? Sometimes it's called a development plan. What are you going to do to get to that goal? What's your mix of funding? Is it grant funding? Is it donors? Is it fee for service? Those are the three that you can latch on to in the beginning to give you steam. Even within those big categories, if you're asking money from individual donors, what kind of campaign are you running? When are you running that campaign? What are all the things you need to do to get ready for that campaign? Same thing I talked about with the programming. Once you have your goal and you've established it, then it begins to signal to you, okay, these are the things that I got to do to get that done. What's the plan? who's working on that plan, and when is it going to be completed. So you want to think in terms of goals for your fundraising, also in terms of your marketing. How many people do you want to reach? How many people do you want to connect with in person in your local community or online? When you have goals like that, you can then look back and say, did we hit our goals? Did it accomplish what we needed to accomplish? It's so important to stay visible as a nonprofit, because that's where you're going to get those connections. That's where the opportunities will come. So you definitely need to have some goals around how you're going to be seen and what are you going to do to put yourself out there on a regular basis. But even a more concrete goal could be, we're going to stand up our branding, or we're going to get trademarked, right? Or we're going to develop a brochure and a one-pager about our organization. And a bigger goal could be developing our communications or branding package. And then within that goal are all the things that I named. It could be your logo, it could be your trademarking, it could be one-pagers and brochures. But it's a goal that you're working toward. Now that you have that goal, like I said before, you know what you're working towards. You know who's supposed to be working on it, because that's a part of a plan when you're reaching a goal, and you have a deadline that you're trying to reach. So I'm going to recap. But even after I recap, I want you to keep watching, because I'm going to share 4 things that will tie all of this together. 4 documents that you need to have that will tie all of this together. So the recap is, make sure you're operating from some kind of strategic plan, and make sure the goals that are in that plan match up with my framework of those 3 areas: your admin, your programming, and your fundraising and communications. And by the way, I didn't come up with that myself. I got that from the IRS, but that's for another story. But it helps organize you when you have to report to the IRS the kind of information that they're looking for. Now, let's talk about the 4 documents that I just mentioned. There are 4 documents that you need to have. These are basic documents, basic plans that every nonprofit should have, especially every new nonprofit. And I've mentioned them sort of as I talked about this video, but I want to talk about them more specifically right now. The first plan is your strategic plan, right? So it outlines your goals. It outlines how you're going to accomplish those goals, who's responsible when they need to get done. That's number 1. Number 2 is your budget. You start with your strategic plan, because you cannot create a budget until you know what you need to spend your money on, until you know what the heck you're focusing on. You can't possibly know what your budget is unless you know what the amount of effort is for the year. But your budget doesn't just include what you plan to spend. It also includes how you plan to bring in money. Where's the revenue coming from? And that's where your fundraising plan comes in. That's number 3. That is your plan for income, for bringing in revenue for your organization that translates from your budget. So your fundraising plan, as I talked about before, includes the details of the types of fundraising that you plan to do, who's responsible, what are the deadlines, and the individual goals within that. And then finally, you need to have some kind of communications or marketing plan where you, on a regular basis, are beating the pavement, telling people about your organization, shouting from the mountaintops about what you do and why it's so needed in your community, right? You need to have a plan. You don't need to do this haphazardly. You need to do this on a regular basis. And it's also helpful to know, okay, what's my engagement plan around that? How do I keep in contact with people? How do I stay relevant with people? Was that helpful? If it was, please leave a comment. Let's talk in the comments. Let's support each other in the comments. And if you need more help, make sure you visit me at www.bossonabudget.com, and I will see you in the next video.